Hello, everybody. Thank you for your very impressive lull just there of anticipation. My name's Caroline Worthington. I'm Director of the Royal Society of Sculptors, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our home Dora house this evening for our In Their Space in Conversation event. I'm thrilled to introduce Isabel de Vasconcellos, who's in the chair, and our three exhibiting artists who are all members of the Society. Rebecca Griffiths, I would say in blue, but you're almost all in blue. In the middle, Alison Cooke, and on the end, Honeywill. And they're going to talk about their residencies at the Red House in Aldeburgh and the show and their practices. So without further ado, over to you, Isabel.
Hello, thank you everybody for coming. We're going to try to project. If you can't hear us, just say. So maybe you've had a look at the show and you know a little bit about the fact that these three bodies of work, they came out of residencies done at the Red House in Aldeburgh. So I thought it might be useful to start out a little bit just finding out from the three of you how you heard about the residencies, why you wanted to do them, and perhaps about how it actually was in practice as opposed to maybe the expectations you took in, because they happened, quite a lot of them, during COVID, which I think probably threw in a few kind of curveballs that you then also had to accommodate. So you were the first one, Hannah.
Yeah, that's right. So it was a call out, well, it's a collaboration between the Royal Society of Sculptors and Britain Peers Arts. So yeah, it's a creative, I think they called it a creative retreat, didn't they? And basically Britain and Peers built Mary Potter, who was a painter, a house within the grounds of the Red House. And connected to that house is a painting studio. So it's a kind of bungalow painting studio. So yeah, I mean, why did I apply? Get to spend a month in Aldeburgh in a beautiful studio in a lovely environment. So kind of, and then you know, you have to sort of submit what you're going to do on this residency. So if I'm really honest, I didn't really know a huge amount about Britain and Peers. So a lot of my interest comes into kind of thinking about queer theory and queer experience. So when I discovered they were sort of partners professionally and romantically, I was kind of sold. So I thought that's really interesting. I'd like to investigate that side of it. So that's the reason I applied and kind of did it.
I similarly thought, yeah, a month by the sea. Who wouldn't apply? But I was also I mean, when I applied, it was like the tail end of the pandemic and kind of the end of clap for carers and all that. So I was interested in Britain's nurse and carer and, you know, just shining a light on that, because it just seemed appropriate at the time. But it was an amazing place. I mean, you get 2 weeks, and then there was about a 3-month gap, and then you go back another 2 weeks, which really worked out well, because initially you go there and you're a bit, although you sort of think you know what you're going to do, you know, you're just, I mean, the first couple of weeks I was digging around looking for clay and stuff like that. And then there's a big gap and you kind of really formulate your ideas. And then, yeah, when I went back, I sort of like did a lot more work. How about you?
So mine was 2022 to 23, so after the I guess pandemic, and I had seen on social media and stuff what both of you had done on your residencies, and I thought that looked really exciting. And then the opportunity came out for Royal Society members as a creative retreat, and I thought that sounded really nice. And I had been on a weekend away in that area quite recently before the call out came out, and I had seen the dome of Sizewell B Power Station on my weekend away, and I thought, I think there might be something there that I might kind of investigate. Maybe if I apply to it in my proposal, I could say something about the environment and about rather than sort of so much the domestic environment of Britain Peers, I could talk about investigating the environment of the Suffolk coastline around it. So yeah, that's what drew me in.
And it all came together, although it wasn't the intention, but somehow over the course of these three residencies, a conversation started, which meant that the three of you wanted to show the work together, which, why do you think that was? Was it because you wanted to have a sense of a culmination around it, or how did that?
Well, I went to visit Rebecca when I was on a different residency about an hour away the following when Rebecca was doing hers, and went to visit, and we were just talking about, it was just such an interesting place to be, and we were both so, interested in what we'd been doing, and just thought it'd be a nice idea to actually sort of, finalise the work or develop it into something and an exhibition, and then, asked Hannah if she'd be interested, and 2 years later, here we are.
So you weren't necessarily, all of you, making work while you were there. You were using it in different ways, but primarily to think and research. Would that be the right way to kind of characterise that?
I was making work a bit, but almost not. My thing was like the clay that made the bricks that built the Wed House, and everything was going to be made out of that. So I was making stuff, but only, developing rough test pieces. I wasn't making what I considered finished work at all. I was just kind of working through ideas, but they were all like lines of interest that I would have wanted to carry on with.
Because one of the things that we've covered in other talks that I've done with sculptors, member sculptors, particularly women, is how residencies can often become very hard to do because they require you to be away from home for very long periods of time. Very often there are huge chunks of time, 4 weeks, more or less. And so there's more and more of a call, from my experience, for things that you can have sort of bite-sized experiences of, which has a practical, you can kind of fit it into your life and your responsibilities, of whether they're caring or working or whatever else. But do you think that there's some unintended consequences that come out of breaking it up in this way into 2 fortnights?
Yeah, that I ended up having sort of almost a year between the two because of different lockdowns hitting during that time. And it was just, that period of time, sort of incubation really, and kind of percolation. And then even beyond my residency, and then coming to this idea of doing this group show together, the work developed once again. So the work that I kind of developed on the residency then took another leap when we kind of tried to think about, it's been at the Dovecot in Aldeburgh. It's a very particular site, very particular venue, and it was sort of like, how do we bring all of this research into and share this space together and sort of like, filter it into this space. So it was a real, for me, it's been 5 years really, percolating and rolling. But just to go back to your original thought, I think it's really, really useful to split the residency, because you spend the first sort of week working out where you are, what you're doing, how to approach it. And then you've almost like chasing your tail to, I've got to get on with this, make sure I do this. And then that time in the middle allows you to sort of like really think about and focus in what you want to do when you go back. And also the space was an empty studio. So, for me, I kind of make things from wood and metal. I can't really bring that with me, and I can't bring my machines with me. So it was sort of like thinking, that kind of was another sort of challenge.
Did you know when you were going what the setup was that it sent in, and was the studio also where you were living, or were you living in the house and working, as it were, in the studio?
Yeah, it was like kind of pretty much like this room really. You just go through a door and then you're into the studio. So you're kind of living in the studio really, weren't you?
Yeah, I think I found it really helpful to have the time divided as well. I didn't have a year between the two bits, but I had maybe 2 months or something. And I think the first time you go, like Hannah was saying, it's such a blank canvas, and there's so much that you could do. And I think it's really important to have vague ideas about what you're going to do, but also be really open-minded. And I went on loads of walks around, and I was saying about my interest in Sizewell nuclear power station, had a tour of there, and so absorbing lots of things, reading, walking around a lot. And then the second lot of 2 weeks could be a lot more purposeful. It was a lot more, the focus was much narrower. Also because for me, in between those 2 times I had applied to something else, which was part of the British Ceramics Biennial 2023. And I kind of said in my proposal for that I would use inspiration from this Red House residency to create an installation about nuclear power and things for the 2023 BCB Festival. So then when I went back, I had this focus to create an installation for that. So I started designing and thinking about that. So that then became the work that I produced for British Ceramics Biennial. That was then the sort of first iteration of the work, which is here. This is kind of the next iteration. So yeah, it's been stages. What about you, Alison?
That breakup, that gap in between, really handy. Whereas otherwise, you're just do this. You've got to kind of like you feel like you're chasing your tail, and you've got to come to some sort of conclusion. And there was no push to do that. And I realised I work really well without a deadline. And also just that empty space, I'm always, and you're isolated, so there's no one around. I think in the first 2 weeks I saw someone from Brit and Pears Arts who went to dinner, and apart from that I didn't really communicate with another person in real life, whereas normally I'm never alone. And so that was kind of, on one hand, absolutely brilliant, but also a little bit scary. But also then you're in this big space. I mean, it's just an amazing and a very unusual situation to be in for me. And I thought it was great. I'd love it. I'd like to do it again.
So maybe it'll be good to get an idea of where in Aldeburgh the Red House is in relation to the sea and to the centre of Aldeburgh and all of that.
So it's about a half an hour walk from town, and it's off a main road, and then there's a sort of long lane. So it was winter, and so I'd try and get back by 4 because it was dark, and you'd go in through this big gate, and there was no one there. And it was kind of like you felt you had to, well, I felt I had to like be indoors with the gate shut by 4. I don't know about you too. yeah, it was a little bit spooky at times.
Yeah.
But
so there was no one normally there, even during the day?
During the day at the Red House offices, I think there might have been people around, but the Red House itself was only opening from March onwards, so there was no visitors. It was, There
were sort of a few grounds people walking around and things like that, but no one who was there permanently.
No one could hear you scream. I'm sure lots of people live. I live in a city, lots of people hear my neighbours breathing. I mean, it was very odd.
Some very interesting work, just inspired by this very strong feeling that you're kind of putting out there. I mean, when you all went there, to some extent, it looks like you had already prepared and you'd booked into to see Sizewell B. How long do you need to do that quite a bit in advance, or is it not,
I think it was about 6 weeks before I went. I needed to book in. Yeah, so that was quite an organised thing that I had planned.
Yeah.
And
how about the walks that you did? Because again, it's a very interesting section of coastline just around that bit of Aldeburgh, Orford Ness. You already knew it because you'd been on holiday there, and that's what meant that you already had these ideas framed.
Yeah, I knew that there was really kind of interesting, kind of delicate coastal environments, rare wildlife there, and then places like Orford Ness, which is really strange, desolate island, and then industrial kind of fragments and things as well. The power station. So I knew that there'd be sort of industry meeting nature in very interesting ways there. So the walks were really helpful to help me to kind of get to know the area more. I could talk a lot more about it, but
well, you will. Don't worry. I'm coming back for more. But and in terms of your approach and research and the resources that were there, were you sort of looking at archives? What were the kinds of resources that were there?
So both me and Hannah, I think, looked quite a lot at the archive. I mean, it's amazing, every letter and postcard and little post-it note that Benjamin Britten or anyone's written to him is kept there. And so I was looking at nearly everything that was to do with his nurse, Rita Thompson. And it was just amazing, an amazing experience to read. It was very sweet. I mean, they were just really funny people. So Peter and Ben and Rita, I mean, some of them would be travelling to Venice and they'd be writing postcards to and from their dogs. And, you just think they had a really fun time, and they just sounded like this really sweet, funny kind of group of people. And it was amazing to see that, and just photographs of them travelling everywhere. And there's a lot of photos. There's particularly one of Benjamin Britten looking out over a balcony in Venice, and you can't see Rita, and Rita's always with him because she's always looking after him. You can just see this fuzzy line around his head, and it's her hair. So even when she's not in a photo, she's just always like, yeah. And it was lovely to have all that stuff so nearby, and you can look at it online as well. So when I wasn't in the archive, I was in the evening sort of looking at photographs online in the archive. It's very immersive. I mean, and then when you look at these photos and you look up and you see images of where they were standing and where they were meeting, so it felt you were very much part of that world, but in the future.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the house because the house was open when I was there. And one of the things about it is that the people that work there absolutely kind of adore Britten and Peers. And it's like I've never been in a workplace where everyone's just so happy to be there and they just want to tell you about them. And, like the archivists are just the most incredible people. I went and spent a sort of good few hours looking at kind of their receipts. I never thought I'd be like going through like lawnmower, petrol, but then it was.
Why were you looking at their receipts?
Because my part of my research was that Britten and Peers had to be clearly separated because of the if they were seen to be sort of living together, and the evidence of that was in their receipts, then and in their bookkeeping, then they could be arrested. So everything had to be completely separated. And one archivist was completely fascinated by this particular, aspect of their lives, and was like showing me all of this. And there was one particular receipt which was from Butchers, which is the outfitters in Aldeburgh High Street, which is still there. And Benjamin Britten used to get his bow ties and socks and shoe repairs done. And there's one particular receipt which is invoiced to Benjamin Britten, and then there's a tiny little like kind of post-it sort of thing that says shoe repairs for Mr. Peers, 4 and 6 or something, whatever that was. But it was like, even to that extent, that they couldn't be seen to be sharing that expense. So it was really like, I had a brilliant few hours looking through their receipts. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in the archive, and then just walking around the house, because it's literally like, I think Peers died in 81, didn't he? I think, or 84. And it's like he's just popped to the shops. It's still kind of very much their home, and, dents in the lino, and, they sometimes sort of move things around a little bit, but you can really get a sense of them as a kind of cocktail parlour. And it's still got all the old bottles in it. It's just, and again, the staff are so enthusiastic, and they just would show me everything, and like all of the little things, little secrets that they're, little quirky things they're really proud of. They sort of share those with you. So, yeah.
So for the works that you made for the show, did they come to you in this process, or had you already taken some ideas of what you might do? How did that kind of combination?
It kind of happened in process, really, because a lot of my work deals with sort of furniture and kind of as a material. So I was sort of thinking, how on earth do I deal with this in a place which is all archive? I can't be cutting up tables and things like that. So we kind of had a tour, and then there's this sort of back room. They had a load of their dining room chairs in. And I said, can I have a couple? I won't promise I won't touch them, but can I have a couple in the studio just to sort of think about? And it was just putting them in the studio and then just photographing, thinking about the proximity of them together and close but not touching. And then, the sun just came through and cast this shadow, and I quickly just sort of recorded it and photographed it. And at that point, I didn't quite know what that was going to be, but that ended up being influencing the piece outside.
So it's a kind of a portrait without them there.
Yeah. Absence of a presence, presence of an absence, and all that. Yeah.
Because chairs are a big part of your practice, and so I found it quite interesting to see how you took a completely different approach, but you still found a way to make sure that, you know, that motif of the chair was there. So there's if you've seen, there's the work outside, and then there's the row of essentially they're kind of images to which you have gilded out the figures. So again, what were those images that you found in the archives, and can we talk about what they are and why you're taking this approach?
Yeah, so they're all images from the archive pre-1967 when homosexuality is decriminalised. So in those photographs, that kind of phrase that I use, like close but not touching, was you'll see Britain and Piers together, but then they're sort of together. So like in like Alison's work, you see there's lots of photos of Rita and Ben holding hands and touching, and you know, clearly being affectionate. But yeah, with Britain and Piers, they couldn't do that.
So not even in their private photographs. And
no, there's one that I didn't actually use, but there's one very it's like a prominent one for me, is that they're standing outside the Red House and they're both very close, you know, sort of like this, but they've both got their hands in their pockets and, you know, just very clearly not together. I mean, there are, like, when sort of in the 70s, they're sort of slightly more affectionate in some of the photos, but from what I know of Benjamin Britten, he was just very much sort of found it quite difficult and quite closeted, even when he didn't need to be. So
because one of the things when you were telling me about your experience, and we were having a little bit of a chat before, you were talking about how there was a sense of a community that they built around their home, but also a sense of privilege that somehow was sheltering them.
yeah, definitely. I mean,
yeah, there's that ambivalence that even within that outwardly they were having to be careful, and yet they had all these very powerful friends. And
yeah, I mean, there is a sort of record that Benjamin Britten got taken in to the police station, but there's no official record of what happened. But I mean, to put it in context, you know, they were really good friends with the Queen Mum, and you know, and in that similar time, we talk about Alan Turing, and you know, he was arrested and chemically castrated, and you know, so the kind of weight of what could have happened is very clear, and what did happen is there. So part of the gilding process is the sort of this very thin layer protects the mild steel from rusting, and they had this sort of layer of privilege protecting their relationship. You know, the grounds of the Red House, you have the Red House, it's huge grounds, there's 3 or 4 other houses in it, and they bring their housekeeper, their friend, Mary Potter, you know, and kind of other, Rita, was she there? Yeah. Sort of like all kind of, protected within this grounds, which is definitely part of afforded by their privilege, yeah.
So this is maybe where we bring in Rita a little bit more, and Rita became the focus of your study. She'd been the carer for Benjamin Britten, is that?
She'd been a nurse in a London hospital, and he'd had a really weak heart all his life and went and had an operation that didn't go well, and she'd been the nurse that looked after him, and then he begged her to come and live with him and look after him up in the Red House, which, you know, eventually she did. And I mean, she just lived with them. I mean, for 2 years, and then once he died, then she stayed on at the Red House, and 10 years later, I think Piers got sick, she looked after him, and then she still stayed there. So they really looked after their staff. I don't think they particularly saw her as staff. I think they saw her as, you know, just an equal. And they had a really close relationship, like really friends. And as Hannah was saying, like, you know, there's loads of photos of him holding hands with Rita, and Rita just sort of being right next to him all the time, but none of him being with Piers and holding hands, which is, you know, quite sad. I mean, very sad. Yeah, so I mean, really, she sort of enabled him to continue composing. So his heart was so weak. I mean, she sort of has diary pages, and one of them was saying, you know, Ben was composing and he sat with Imogen Holst, who's Gustav Holst's daughter, who like, takes all the notations, and he was getting so excited by it, his heart starts beating fast, and then she has to make him stop because he literally might die. It's just, you know, it's so bizarre that amazing that he enjoys what he does so much and he just can't, you know, and then he stops for half an hour and then he can start composing again. And the work I did, the tiled piece, is a piece of music called A Birthday Handsman. It was composed whilst in her care. So I was looking for something that, I mean, the conceit is that it may not exist if it hadn't been for Rita. So something that both of them sort of were involved in. And it's made from the clay that made the bricks that built the Red House. And also the hand-holding casts. So I copied from photographs in the Red House some of their hand-holding positions and then cast them in plaster, of which there are many photographs of them holding hands. It's very sweet, every connotation. So she was a really big part of their lives, and she travelled the world with him. I mean, she must have had an amazing time, and she didn't particularly know who Benjamin Britten was when she met him and knew nothing about the music. And I don't know if it grew on her after a while or she just genuinely didn't give a hoot. I have no idea. There's no mention of her thoughts on opera. But I quite like to think she just didn't care, but just liked them.
So the piece in the hall, as you enter with these, they look like bricks, but there's a lot of calligraphic markings and hand markings on them. Can you? How did that idea come to you, and how does it map onto this music, this piece of music?
Well, I think right from the beginning, I think even when I applied, I liked the idea of capturing music in clay. I didn't quite know how that would pan out because it was just a proposal and you just hope it does. And so I got a pianist called Ashley Fripp to play this piece of music. So I wanted that piece of music. The archivist had said, you know, it's the one that mostly relates to Rita, and also she named that piece of music. And so it was 17 minutes long, and he broke it up over these 100 or so tiles. And because the music is for harp and voice, and he's a pianist, he was like, you could just play it, but he wanted to do it. I mean, this is very much the way he translated it.
So the two of you were working together in the same space. He was playing and you were making.
No, I made and then sat with wet tiles, tending them for weeks on end until a day when the pianist could come. and then, we were sort of feeding them these big trays of tiles. And he was doing, I think the mark making is the finger marks is the voice and all the other marks are the harp. So he was looking at this, he was breaking it up into stanzas, I think you call it. And so it's the speed and the weight and the loudness. And so he sort of made up his own language as it was. So I think he could probably translate it almost back into a similar piece of music, but whether anyone else could read that, I don't know. But I did keep saying no one is going to know. But he still took it really seriously, so I was really pleased about that.
How did you find him?
He's my friend Diane's next door neighbour. International concert pianist Ashley Fripp. He's brilliant. He's really good. He's off being an international concert pianist right now. Otherwise he'd be here and explain it better than me.
There's a nice overlap that he's round our house with me and my husband all the time in a not dissimilar way. He's kind of like this third presence in our house.
It'd be quite interesting if there were any musicians here, if they would, if they would sort of see the tile piece and be able to imagine how that would be translated back.
I mean, because the mark making does sort of, you can see where it kind of builds and travels on. And
But I don't know, what do you two think? Any comments?
Well, it's strange because when I was looking at that, I had seen it before. It did bring me to mind the sort of things of like experimental composers, form of notation, or also the use of, I'm thinking about like people like Daphne Aram, who pioneered this idea of ceramics, which was the idea of drawing directly onto transparent film and having photo-optical sensors to translate those drawings into sound. So it has this kind of feel. And some of those are almost like abstract paintings. And it says that has that feel, I mean, but in the sense that it's very interesting the way it's like a private notation in a way. And the way through, he said that the performer might be able to retranslate it, but there's something very private and intimate about it as well.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, it's just that language from him to that. I mean, you know, it's a one-off musical translation, I guess.
And so was the focus on Rita for your residency coming out of the whole COVID experience, or was there some other pre-existing?
I think it just, the day, I mean, when I was looking at it, it just happened to be that era of when everyone had stopped clapping for carers and really carers needed money, not clapping. You know, it was just that. And also my mum was ill and I was organising care for her and witnessing what caregivers actually do, which is like really hard work and like genuinely emotionally supportive. You know, like it was just sort of in the air and taking up a lot of my brain space. And when I was there, you know, my mum was still having the care and I was still going, oh, she's got the medication. You know, there's just a lot of that. So I was just very aware of her job and what it entailed, and that she would have had quite a good job as a carer, but a lot of carers don't.
So again, there's a privilege at play there, in, you know, expressed in your work, but in very different ways, and that is within that domestic setting. And when Rebecca, you and I were first talking, and you said that you were you knew what they had done, and so almost it was as though you thought, well, so that must mean I go outside.
Yeah, intimidated by all the amazing work that's been made. Yeah, I suppose I thought that some really good ideas had already been expressed, and why not take a completely different tact? And I actually wasn't sure when I was writing the proposal if it would just be too far, like whether it kind of, my ideas needed to be a bit more in the domestic, related to the domestic sphere. But I thought I'll see what happens, and obviously it was accepted, so I went with that.
So that brings in the context and the setting in sort of on the Suffolk coast, and this incredibly varied setting that we talked about. Were you there also in the winter, or?
Yeah, I think we were
Okay.
there over the winter.
Okay, and how did you deal with the darkness? Were you out very early in the morning and back sort of the sunset? Or?
Yeah, I think we were all the same. Felt that we needed to be locked inside safely when it was dark, and then there was quite a long evenings ahead, because there wasn't a lot of light in the studio to work by either in the evenings. So yeah, lots of entertainment in the evenings, but and drawing and things like that. But yeah, no, I was out walking in the daylight. Yeah.
And what did you discover that you didn't? So one thing that you mentioned in terms of the workings of a power station that's next to the sea, because you had this tour of the inside of it, but then you walked around the coastline around it, and there were a couple of observations which I found rather interesting, maybe a little macabre, but I might leave that to you to kind of go into as well.
Yeah, so on that first 2-week period, obviously I had the tour inside the power station, which was really fascinating in itself. The security is sort of really high when you go in. You have your phones and everything's taken off you, and you get told about the science behind it. And it's strange because there's actually not many buildings that you can go inside of, because it's mostly operated remotely. But there's one building that you can go inside, which is the turbine hall, where all the turbines are really, really loud, generating all this electricity, and it's kind of really, really deafening. And the vibrations sort of move through your whole body as you're kind of standing there. Obviously have to wear like protective gear and stuff. So that was quite an overpowering sort of experience to be in there. And the people who run the tours, it's operated and run by EDF. And they're very kind of careful about what they tell you. It's, you know, they obviously say that it's a really safe way of generating electricity and everything. And it's commissioned, I think, for another like 30 years or something. But even with what they tell you, it's still quite overwhelming, you know, about like the uranium that they use to power it. They have to replace this sort of uranium, this huge sort of uranium tablet that they use every 4 years. And after that time, they have this major operation to replace it. And each one of these huge uranium, I can't remember what it's called. It's like a rod. Yeah, it's a uranium rod. I'm pretty sure that's what they call it. It's pretty simple. They put it into storage. So a lot of the area of this nuclear power site is this huge kind of storage building with really, really thick concrete. I'm doing that, but it's way thicker than that. Huge concrete walls, and every 4 years they put another one of this kind of these uranium rods in it. And so over time it's just going to be filled with all this active uranium. And obviously building another one there now as well. So and it's very, very close to the sea, because they use the North Sea as a coolant. It's a high pressured water reactor. And so if you're outside of the site that has high security and everything, and you're on the beach or on the coastline, it's quite eerie, really, in many ways. I was telling you, I think, about there's this particular point, kind of about 10 meters into the North Sea, where loads and loads of gulls kind of swarm above the sea. And it's kind of like a feeding frenzy, like they're all kind of finding all these little bits of fish and sea life underwater. And that's because in that bit under the sea, there is a pipe leading from Sizewell B, pumping out water. So the nuclear power station sucks in water to use as a coolant all the time, and then pushes it back out 3 minutes later when it's kind of done its cycle of cooling. And when it pushes the water back out, it's slightly warmer. And also they try and filter like sea life and stuff out of this water, but some sea life gets caught in it, particularly the smaller ones. And then, so when it's pumped back, it has all these bits of dead sea life in it, and the kind of the gulls and things are kind of completely crazy feeding on it. So it's just something weird about standing there with the kind of hum, the constant hum and the buzz of the nuclear turbines like behind you, and then all of these gulls like feeding friendly on these bits of sea life, and then all the kind of coastline, and then nearby these beautiful kind of reeds with rare birds and things like that. It's very atmospheric, yeah.
And the works that came out of it are, when I was reading them before we spoke, when I saw them in Snape, I thought they looked like, in a way, sort of architectural models of industrial buildings. And yes, pipe work and things like that you might see, sort of exposed pipes in industrial buildings. But also with kind of shapes that I was going, well, I kind of recognize it. I'm not sure what it is. So there's a nice connection also with what you then went on to do, which was a combination of kind of gathering sort of flotsam and various things from the shoreline, but also relating it to another site a little bit further. Is it further up the coast in Dunwich.
Slightly further north. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we can talk about how these two end up having a kind of dialogue between them as well.
Yeah, sure. So in my coastal walks and stuff, I walked past Sizewell, and then if you go north, you get to Dunwich, a tiny little village, and it's really fascinating. It's got a really fascinating history because in the medieval times, it was this really rich port town and had loads of churches. And then it was kind of lost to the sea in the 13th century due to crazy storms and erosion, coastal erosion. And so none of that bit of Dunwich remains at all. And it's just a tiny, tiny little village now with inhabitants of like 100 people or something. But there were all these maps that were kind of drawn out of what the old Dunwich might have looked like and where all the old churches were and stuff. And then in the 70s, some divers decided that they might be able to locate some of the buildings according to these maps that they had under the sea, they used sonar, and a diver was reported to see the spires of one of the main churches under the water, exactly where it was thought to have been on the map, sort of thing. And apparently he saw starfish and lobsters on the spire of the church and things like that. And there's a legend that people in Dunwich can hear the old church bells chiming or something during a storm. But there's this tiny little museum in Dunwich now, the Dunwich Museum, and it's really sweet museum, and it's dedicated to telling a story. And they've got little fragments and remnants of buildings that divers and things have found, or that have been revealed somehow in this museum. So fragments of old structures and bits of architecture. So those fragments definitely inspired some of the forms. And then the idea about what might happen to fragments of buildings that are underwater with all the sea life and things. That informed my collecting of lots of flotsam and jetsam and bits of kind of shells. And I kind of developed this practice of pushing clay straight onto the coastline, onto the shoreline by Sizewell, and it captured a lot of the details of the bits of wildlife, the seaweed, the shells and things like that. And then I later used that as a press mould, which would create the more organic textures in the pieces.
But also, when I went to see she had lots of boxes of polystyrene and things that had held televisions and electronic goods, and she was using the shapes of electronic goods, which would have been powered by Sizewell as the basis. And then I recognise those shapes now in those, which I really like.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, electronics packaging. It's also a big inspiration. Yeah, I kind of kept on collecting this polystyrene packaging from an electronics shop in Aldeburgh. They became my friend, and I think they housed washing machines and TVs and stuff originally, but I put them out on the studio, and they looked quite architectural, and they kept reminding me of the little diagrams and drawings that I had of Sizewell B and the blueprint of it that I had on the wall. So yeah.
Yeah, they also look like little, once you've made these pressings, they look like circuit boards and things like that as well, there's lots of things going on.
Yeah, they are a bit circuit boardy, and yeah.
So before we open up to questions, I think it'd just be nice for the three of you maybe to talk about that, from going from an idea of doing a show and how it first came together at Snape, which is the home of the Aldeburgh Festival, and then through to here, and then we'll please get ready with your questions, is what I'm saying.
She's looking at you, not me. Oh, you can start.
We kind of connected online, didn't we? And Zoom calls and sort of threw a few ideas around as what we could do. Yeah, and then just thought, let's ask if we can exhibit at Snape Maltings, and if we could exhibit here. And it was like, yes, like great. Right, we might need some money, so we kind of did a sort of like probably one of the most painful things you could do with 3 people that don't know each other that well is an Arts Council application through Zoom online. Yeah, but we bonded over that, didn't we? And there was a sort of clarity actually by going through that sort of painful process. It sort of clarified what our aims were for the exhibition and how we were going to do it, and then. Unfortunately, we weren't successful, but we did get a bit of money from East Anglia Art Fund, didn't we? So that kind of paid a bit of material costs. But we were really keen to do it, so we decided it was worth.
Yeah. And we really liked the Dove. I mean, initially we were like, yeah, we want this big space, and they were offering all these big spaces. But the Dove coat, which is just, it's like an emoji of a house. It's just a cube with a roof. It's beautiful. Beautiful space. Yeah, it really fitted, and it kind of fitted the amount of work we had. And I mean, although we're on a similar subject matter, we've got very different work. It just seemed to fit together quite well. Yeah, and we got on really well, which was very lucky.
And it was, I mean, I found it almost emotional, like seeing all the work come together for the first time physically as well, because there is something that really draws it together, and I think themes of kind of so you both have themes of kind of care and relationships and things as well, but I think my work is quite tactile as well, and kind of comes into the idea of touch and tactility. So it's something that just there's like a quiet resonance between them somehow. So yeah, and it was really nice seeing them come together at Snape Maltings as well, because of that context and that backdrop and the home of Aldeburgh Festival and Benjamin Britten and things was really amazing. And then seeing it here again, though, you know, the relationship between the work is still really strong, and
it fits, or we think it does.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I've seen it in both, and it looks really great and very, very different. But somehow, as you say, that it somehow there are implicit kind of connections that hold it together in both places. So I don't want to ask all the questions, because I'd like to give you a chance to sort of maybe come in with some ideas. And anyone got any?
Yeah, so make a comment. There's a real sense of tenderness, I think, in the way you all 3 of you speak and the exhibition, which actually is, I think, quite unusual for a sculpture show. Something that's there, and kind of a way you describe things in sculpture. Where do you think that's coming from? Is it from peers in Britain and their relationship, or is it something else that you felt, or 3 of you felt, maybe like in the house or the residency?
well, I think partly being in that situation where they were so supportive of each other and everyone around them, it felt very cosseted and looked after and kind, and everyone there that you did meet was kind of, it's kind of like emotionally nourishing in some weird way. And I think you just felt relaxed to just, you know, I don't know, it
was sort of infectious. I felt like this sort of you end up kind of feeling really emotionally connected to Britain and Piers, and sort of really odd actually, because
and it was very it felt really unjudgmental. I mean, partly because the residency didn't ask to meet the public, do community work, which, you know, is all valid, whatever, but you were very much just left to do whatever you want. You were trusted to just do lots of stuff or nothing. It was, so I think there's something within that comes through. I don't know.
maybe the quietness as well of the place, the fact that it was kind of more of a retreat, I suppose.
Yeah. Although it did have brackets, not a holiday, I seem to remember.
I mean, I even found, in terms of the environment, I know I wasn't kind of involved in the house and the archive as much, but I did look around the house and see all of Britton and Piers's possessions and things like that. And you could tell how much they cared, Britton, like how much Britton cared about the environment as well. And you know, I've kind of felt tenderness in that. Even to the way he kind of had like little jars of pebbles and things that he used to collect from Aldeburgh Beach and different beaches around, and he used to apparently give a pebble to different friends and different visitors. And I don't know, and the way they used to kind of clean this jar of pebbles every day and look after it, and I don't know, yeah, make sure that everything was in place and everything had a story to it as well. And so you did, that sense of care and tenderness was definitely communicated.
That is Abby.
Really interesting talk. Thank you very much. I was wondering about it. You said it gets really. You were there in the winter, and it got really dark by 4, and you were on your own. Did you encounter any presences or any ghosts?
We'll pass this one to Hannah.
So I'm quite cynical, to just put this as a line. Okay, but Mary Potter was alive and kicking in that house, 100%. We definitely had some odd, all of us experienced some sort of odd sensations, a few things being thrown around in the kitchen, things like that. I think Rebecca got locked in one day, didn't you? And Alison had a few things. So yeah, there's definitely, I've actually got a recording of her breathing at like 4 o'clock in the morning, which is terrifying. And I took it to the staff and they were all trying to tell me it was hedgehogs. I was like, it's not a hedgehog, it's Mary Potter. And then that morning I woke up and I was sort of quite freaked out. So they had loads of like old Aldeburgh Festival programmes. So I just got one to take my mind off, opened it, and it was all about Mary Potter and how she died in the house of lung cancer. I was like, oh. God. But she was definitely there, 100%. I think she was, because then I did a little research on her, and I think she was at the peak of her career when she got the cancer, and she was about to have like major retrospectives in London. So I feel like we were the first visual artists to use that space, and she was just a little bit annoyed about it. So she was sort of just making herself clear. That's my...
The thing is, I remember having a message from you when I first went. I think I said, is there any equipment there? And I didn't know you at all. And you said, oh, well, I hope something. You made some comment about Mary Potter and it just didn't. I don't know what that's about. And I'm so pleased I didn't know any of that. So I think I got off relatively lightly in comparison.
In the studio space, we were saying that it was completely empty, but the one thing that was on it was on the walls was a portrait of Mary Potter. So she was looking down.
I covered her in bubble wrap when I got there. So it's just distracting, not out of any other reason.
But it was very a benevolent portrait, so I kind of felt that it was quite friendly.
That's what happens when you're on your own for too long.
I didn't expect this to become like a little bit of uncanny. Yeah. Annie.
So I'm just trying to get the timeline going here. So you didn't overlap, no. So was the work made when you then all met, or did you discuss the making? Will you discuss it as you went along? How did the relationship build?
Hannah was there in 21.
2020, 2021.
And then I was there 21, 22. This is in the winter. And then 23, 24. And then when Rebecca was there, I went to visit her and then we discussed it. But then there was another, it's obviously been a year or so. That's when we made the work. So we were making, I was making like maquettes and test pieces while I was there. But at the time when I was there was no intention of making finished work at that point. It was none. So it wasn't until this last year that I made the work.
So you saw each other and the work for the first time together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, it has been 2 years that we've been in conversation. Yeah, it's been 2 years. So in that time, the work has really developed in that time. And you were both both had a whole nother set of work.
Yeah, I think the work that I kind of made actually I didn't particularly, on reflection, I wasn't pleased with it. So I was a bit like, oh, it's not quite there. And actually, when I had to sort of go back and I sort of revisited the shadow work, and I was much happier with, what's being produced for this show. I think it's, yeah, I'm really glad I had the opportunity to sort of revisit it, actually.
Can I add on to the question, which is just, did it then go on to inspire new bodies of work for either of you?
I had to cut away things that I was interested in just to finish. It's almost, I could go on with it as a subject matter forever, really. I mean, it's just pretty endless, the archive. But you?
Yeah, I developed a proposal for the first 2 weeks. I was also developing a proposal for a PhD, which then, by the time I went back the other time, I was already in the PhD. So a lot of the work is kind of focused around my PhD research as well. So it's definitely feeding into that.
I was just going to make a comment actually for people in the room from the society's point of view. We don't send our members off on creative retreats or residencies and tell them to make a show or make a body of work. I just wanted to make that clear that it's a joyful thing that's come out of these 3 residencies. But we're always very clear that the time and space is to be used however the member or the artist wants to do it. So I just wanted to make that clear. There's been no pressure to create a body of work or to create a show from these experiences. As I say, it's a very joyful and happy outcome. But yeah, to be clear.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all. It was such a pleasure to hear how you collaborated and made this happen. Thanks.